Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Karwan, the Heritage Exploration Initiative. I'm Ishan, and today we are here with a new conversation series, Karwan Baithak Sarhad Ke Is Par Us Par, to commemorate, in a sense, the 75th anniversary of the independence of British India and also the partition of the same, which are the facets of the same coin, two different facets of the same coin. And for our first session, and we are collaborating with Sadaf Hussain, who is a wonderful chef who has promised us biryani after the series, and he's a wonderful podcaster and a writer. So thank you so much, Sadaf Bhai, for collaborating.
Thank
For,
you.
for our first session, we are going to talk about two very different but same cities at the same time, Lahore and Delhi, and the impact that partition had on both of them. And to talk about this, we have two wonderful speakers, Ishtiaq Ahmad Sahab and Sohail Hashmi Sahab, joining us from Sweden and Delhi, respectively. Sohail Hashmi is a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, a heritage activist. He doesn't like to be called as a historian, but he knows a lot of history than most of the historians now. So thank you so much, Sohail Saab, for joining in. He's known for his heritage walks in Delhi that you can check on on his Facebook page. Over to Sadaf Bhai to introduce our second speaker for the day.
Thank you, Sean. I am excited, nervous both at the same time. I feel like back to school, college, basically, not necessarily school as such. We have Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed, a Swedish political scientist and author of Pakistani descent. He holds a PhD in political science from Stockholm University. He is a professor of emeritus of political science at Stockholm University. He's also an honorary senior fellow of Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. He was a visiting research professor at the Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore, and at the South Asian Studies Program, National University of Singapore from June 2007 to 2010. He is the editor in general of Liberal Arts and Social Science International Journal, which is also called LASIG. He is a member of the Editorial Advisory Board of Asia Ethnicity, Journal of Punjab Studies, IPRI Journal Islamabad, and PIPS Research Journal of Conflict and Peace Studies Islamabad. So welcome to both of you, Hashmi Saab and Ishtiaq Saab. It's, as I said, privilege to meet both of you this way. Otherwise, kahan hi mulaqat hoti hai. And I am nervous, excited to learn about the Twin Cities. That was once one, but now two. So yeah, over to both of you.
Yeah, so the format, as for our audience who's listening to us, the format is that we'll have the opening remarks from our speakers, then we'll get into the conversation. And if you have any questions, you can send in the comments, and we'll see if our speakers can get back to your questions in the comments later. So Ishtiaq Saab, first, if you want to start, and then we'll go to Sohail Saab, and then we'll start the conversation.
Thank you very much. This seems to be a very interesting occasion to discuss 75 years of the partition and what it did to Lahore and Delhi. I would begin with the Lahore story that I was born there on the 24th of February, 1947. And my earliest memories of people discussing, around me at home was about the partition and some of the incidents which took place in our part of Lahore, which is known as Muzang, and our house was on Temple Road, Lahore. On the 12th of August, my mother was just looking out from the window, and then she noticed that on her right, where there is a square, the local roughnecks, gundas, goons, they had gathered in large numbers. And she could sense that some trouble was on the way, because by that time, Lahore was up in flames. From March 1947 onwards, communal riots consisting of stabbings, arson, incendiary, bombs being exploded were taking place. And the serenity and the tranquility of Lahore. Before the partition riot started, Lahore was famous as a paragon of communal harmony. Although it was the hub of political activism, by and large, people had learned to live in peace with one another. But in March 1947, Lahore got caught up in the wave of communal riots which had started actually on the 16th of August 1946 in Calcutta, where several thousand people were killed in a few days. Then that contagion moved eastwards, and Hindus were killed in large numbers in Noakhali and Tripura. The same contagion then spread westwards, and several thousand Muslims were killed in Bihar. Hundreds of Muslims were killed in Bombay. And then in December 1946, in Haripur Hazara district of the Northwest Frontier Province, now called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, the Sikhs and Hindus were attacked mercilessly and thousands were killed, and several thousand actually shifted to Rawalpindi city, which was the northernmost city of Punjab, to seek refuge. Then we have from the 24th of January 1947, the Muslim League calling direct action in Punjab to bring down the coalition government led by Sir Khizr Hayat Tiwana of the Punjab Unionist Party, supported by the Congress Party and the Sikh Panthik parties. The agitation had been launched because in the election, out of 175 seats for the whole of Punjab, the Muslims had 86 or 85 reserved seats, of which the Muslim League won 75, some say 73. The Congress won 50 seats, and the Sikh Panthik parties won 23. And then about 10 seats were for the scheduled castes, Punjabi Christians, and Anglo-Indians. So now the problem is who will form the government, because nobody had the majority of 87, 88 to form the government. First, the Muslim League, being the biggest party in the assembly, was invited to try to form the government, but they failed. Then the Congress and Sikhs went to Sir Khizr Tiwana and said, we'll support you as Chief Minister of Punjab. And so that is how a government had come into being in Punjab, which now the Muslim League wanted to bring down through the agitation. From 24th January till 26th of February, mass agitations were carried out by the Muslim League, and people were arrested in the thousands. Then finally, on the 26th, an agreement was reached, and the detainees were released while the Muslim League called off the agitation. But something else had happened which was very significant. On the 24th of February, just a few days earlier, the British Prime Minister Attlee had declared that we will hand over power to Indians in a united or partitioned India by June 1948. Now, when that announcement was made, and this agitation had taken place, the Chief Minister of Punjab, also called Prime Minister of Punjab, Sir Khizr Tiwana, realized that his role was over, because his party, which previously used to rule Punjab, had been reduced to a mere seat or seats of 18 seats, and most had been taken away by the Muslim League. And he realized that in the future to determine the future of India, it will be the Muslim League and the National Congress who would be consulted, not his party anymore. So on the 2nd of March, he resigned. Then on the 3rd of March, Master Tara Singh comes out of the Punjab Assembly declaring Pakistan Murdabad, we will never let Pakistan come into being or Punjab come under the rule of Muslims. That very evening, Hindu and Sikh leaders met in Purani Anarkali, Lahore, and made very fierce speeches to the same effect. No Pakistan, no chances of Punjab being brought as a whole in Pakistan. On the 4th of March, then Hindu and Sikh students came out in large numbers in what is known as Gol Bagh, then now known as, I think, Ayub Park or something, Nasser Park, Nasser Bagh, in front of Government College, agitating that we don't want Pakistan, we don't want Punjab to come under in Pakistan. The police opened fire, and that's the story of Punjab going through, Lahore going through bloodshed, which spread to Amritsar, Multan, and Rawalpindi. Of course, we are talking about Lahore. So this grand calm which had prevailed for a long time in Lahore because of the Punjab Unionist Party, which was an intercommunal party led by Muslims but supported by Hindus and by Sikhs, its era was over. Communalism had taken over. And in the 1940s, the percentage of demographic structure of Lahore was about 30% Hindus and Sikhs and 60% Muslims. If one just went to Lahore on a visit, people could be confused that this was predominantly a Hindu city largely, because most of the upscale localities, most of the businesses, most of the industries, most of the cinemas, most of the film studios were owned by Hindus. But if you went to the district of Punjab, Lahore, then many villages were predominantly Muslim. So this way, Lahore had a Muslim majority both in the city as well as in the district, but on appearance, it looked like very much a Hindu cultural city with all major property owned by them. So the partition riots began, and once they started, they never really went away. And as the weeks and months proceeded, the attacks or the conflicts became fiercer, more bloody, more armed. But the Hindus and Sikhs were on the losing side. And in June 1947, to be precise, the night of June 21, 22, Shalmi Gate locality, which was a Hindu Sikh majority locality in Punjab was set ablaze. In my book, The Punjab Bloodied, Partition and Cleansed, I have given the confession by one of the persons who was party to this setting of fire to Shalmi, Haji Abdur Rahman Gill. He was then only 17 years old. His father, Billa Jatt, was a famous Gunda. And the police and the magistrate, Muhammad, Chima, Muhammad Ghani Chima, had sought his help to set fire to Shalmi Gate. And Billa had sent his son saying that he was a minor. So if they are caught, the police case against him would not be that strong. So the whole confession is there. But after that fire, the Hindus and the Sikhs realized they can't hold on to Lahore, and they fled in very large numbers. By the time the partition took place, only a few thousand Hindus and Sikhs were left in Lahore, who within days then almost went away altogether. I would say that what I'm telling you about Lahore would be true of the whole of what became West Punjab. Its 4.5 million Hindus and Sikhs were all gone, across the border into East Punjab and beyond into Delhi. The first paper I wrote on the partition thing was the result of my visit to Delhi in 1999. And as you said, it seemed that if I were only to close my eyes, I would be in another part of Lahore. The buildings, the old town, the walled cities, they looked so very similar. And since I was staying at the Indian International Center, incidentally, there was a corner called the Lahore Corner, where people from Lahore, Pran Neville and Dr. Sobti, who was the, I think, medical advisor to the President of India, I think Mr. Kapoor, whose family owned the main textbook publishing house in Lahore, and so many other people used to sit there. And when they got to know that I had come to write about the Hindus and the Hindus and Sikhs of Lahore who fled to Delhi, they extended me full cooperation. And so the first paper, which later on is incorporated in my partition book, is based on those oral histories I collected. Let me say like this now. What happened to Lahore when all the Hindus and Sikhs left? Mostly it was Muslims from East Punjab, especially, I would say, Amritsar, but then also Jalandhar and Ludhiana, who came and occupied those places which had been vacated by the Hindus and Sikhs. Some people from Delhi and further on, Urdu speaking, did settle in Lahore, but most of them were directed towards Karachi. The authorities saw to it that Urdu speaking people didn't settle in large numbers in Lahore. They went to Sindh and Karachi. So, I mean, I don't know how many minutes I've used, but my initial remarks would be that whenever I go to India, and mostly I go to Delhi, one reason is I hope to meet people who are from Lahore and to speak Lahori Punjabi and feel at home. And when I go around Delhi, of course, Delhi is now much bigger. So many things have changed. so many new localities have come up. But the old walled city, the Jama Masjid, and some of those places are historical places where once there was a very large Muslim presence, which I'm sure Sohail Bhai will tell us about when he talks about what happened to Delhi. But what more can I add? I would say that this was a great, great tragedy for Lahore, because pre-partition Lahore had so many, places reminding us daily of the favors done by the departing Hindus and Sikhs. Let me name a few. Sir Ganga Ram, I would say, was the greatest philanthropist of Lahore and even of Punjab. Because of him, there are so many colleges, Sir Ganga Ram Hospital, the medical college, which is now university. Lahore College of Women was originally meant for, women, mostly women of all sorts. All this is Sir Ganga Ram. He developed Mall Road, Lahore, and so many other places. And he very liberally generated to charitable causes. Then you have equally the great services of Lala Bela Ram and his son Rai Bahadur Ram Saran Das. Rai Bahadur Ram Saran Das is the grandfather of Karan Thapar, this famous Indian, TV personality. And then Sardar Dayal Singh established Dayal Singh College and the Dayal Singh Library and the Tribune newspaper, I think in 1888 or 1880. So all these things, whenever you go to Lahore, they remind you of a very strong presence of these non-Muslims, Hindus and Sikhs. The hospitals, I named Sir Ganga Ram Hospital. Lala Lajpat Rai built a hospital in the memory of his mother, and it's known as Gulab Devi Hospital, which is a 1,500-bed hospital, mainly taking care of chest infections. Then there is Janki Devi Hospital, a maternity hospital, which a Sikh doctor built in memory of his wife who died while delivering the baby. So, when you look at all this, and then you think about Krishan Chandra, the great story writer, he was from Lahore or lived his life in Lahore, earned his reputation as a great short story writer and novelist in Lahore, went to the same college as I did, FC College Lahore, and I communicated with him also when I came to Sweden. So you find this Lahore-Delhi relationship only very politically, artificially broken. Culture-wise, history-wise, you look at the 1857 uprising and what happened to Delhi. On that account, people from the Punjab came and crushed the uprising. So there are these stories you can also tell. But what I'm trying to say is that because Delhi was the capital of the Mughals, Agra and then Delhi, and Lahore was their, major province, even from Mughal rule, you find so many connections. Akbar was in Lahore for 13 years. He ruled from Lahore. And then Emperor Jahangir is buried in Lahore. Aurangzeb Alamgir built the Badshai Mosque, which until recently was the biggest mosque in the world. So this connection between Delhi and Lahore is also to be mentioned. I think I've almost taken the 25, 30 minutes you allotted me, but we can come back to it later on if you would like me to respond to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Sohail sir, if you can unmute.
या तो एक तो पहले प्रोफेसर इश्तियाक का बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया, because the way he has laid out the frame. So, and I find myself extremely inadequate to come up with anything that is even remotely touches on this at the same level about Delhi. But let me begin by saying that and this might come as a surprise to many of our listeners, Delhi was never a Muslim majority city like Lahore. And throughout history, from the Sultanate period down, there were different locations, but Delhi was not a city that was a Muslim majority city. And at the time of partition, the percentage of Muslims living in Delhi, and at that time, Delhi, let's be clear, was primarily Shah Jahanabad. Because outside Shah Jahanabad were the scattered villages, and there was New Delhi. And New Delhi, Ishtiaq Saab would probably agree with me, was not very different from Islamabad today. Nobody lives there. New Delhi was a place where nobody lived. Those who took up residence there were birds of, birds of flight who would come there, spend their time there as long as they were posted, and then they will go back. And Delhi continues to be that even today. MPs, ministers, senior officers of the bureaucracy or senior officers of the armed forces, all of them come there for short or long periods and then they leave. So the resident population was Shah Jahanabad and the scattered population in the villages. At the time of partition, the population of Delhi was 900,000. And 30% of them were Muslims. So Delhi was 70%, 67% Hindu, Jain, and just about 33% Muslims. Delhi did not have segregated areas. Shah Jahanabad did not have segregated areas. There were areas where would be more Muslims or there would be more Hindus, but there were large areas where populations were mixed. So, for example, Bazar Sitaram, I was talking to somebody whose families have lived there from Shah Jahan's time, came from a family of illustrious scholars of Persian and Sanskrit, Gulzar Zutshi Delvi. And he told me, he went to college with my father, so I knew him through that connection. And he told me that in his childhood and till the partition happened, Bazar Sitaram was 50% Hindus and 50% Muslims. And that is how large number of localities were. And they were neighbors who have lived together for generations. So when partition happened and the killings began, the killings were very well organized because people would not attack their neighbors. They would go to another locality. and attack there and come back. So, and this was fairly clear. And this I know from what my grandfather and my father and my uncles told me. We used to live in Kashmiri Gate. Incidentally, I was born in 1950. So I have no memories, no immediate memories. What I have are things that I have read or heard from family members. So my grandfather and other people in Kashmiri Gate, and Kashmiri Gate was a very mixed area. Traditionally, it was an area where the English had first come and lived. So, and later it became a mixed population area. So there were Parsis there were Bengali Hindus, there were Muslims, there were Hindus, you know. They had set up a committee and they used to guard that entire area, walking through the night to ensure that there is no rioting takes place. But all that collapsed one day when somebody dragged a dead body across the railway tracks and threw it in the Kashmiri Gate area. And from the next day, trouble began. My maternal grandfather used to live in Timarpur with his son, who used to teach in the Kashmiri Gate Polytechnic. And this was an area which was basically Hindu majority area. But their neighbors had told my grandfather and my maternal uncle, my mamu, Abbasi Sahab, don't worry, we are there and nothing will happen to you. And then some days later, people from a surrounding village came and burst a bomb. And then their neighbors came and they said, Abbasi Sahab, now if these people from outside come, will not be able to protect you. So it will be better that you move to some safe place. Now, at the time of partition, the scale of the transfer of population that takes place has been described as the largest migration in human history or in documented human history. Numbers vary, but it's been placed between 10 million to 20 million, which is 1 crore to 2 crore people cross the borders, the newly created borders. And close to the number of women that went missing has been estimated to be about 80,000, but it could be 100,000. And lakhs were killed in this madness that took over people who had been living together for centuries. The impact on Delhi was phenomenal. As Professor Ishtiaq has described about what happened to Lahore, something similar happened to Shahjahanabad. When the outward migration of Muslims came to an end, the population of Muslims in Shahjahanabad, which was 33% in 1947, had come down to 4%. And the total population of the city had come down from 900,000 to 600,000. Simultaneously, migration was happening from what is now Pakistan. And by the end of 1948, the population of Delhi had boomed from 600,000 to 1,400,000. Now, the impact of this is very difficult for us today to understand. But a city which was the city of Urdu was inundated by Punjabi-speaking people. The majority population became Punjabi-speaking. And the numbers were so huge that Delhi could not accommodate. For people who were coming from Pakistan, refugee camps were set up. The Tughlaqabad fort became one major refugee camp. The Kotla Firoz Shah became another major refugee camp. Another large refugee camp was set up in the Kingsway camp area, which is uh, in North Delhi, beyond Delhi University. But this was not even a patch on the kind of spaces that were required. And what Sadaf was talking about, this I have just learned some time ago from O.P. Jain, whose family, very old family of Delhi, and he was the founding convener of Intact Delhi. So he was telling me that outside Red Fort, all around, tens of thousands of people just put up shanties. And they would pick up bits of cardboard to create shelters. And that area came to be known as Gatte Ka Shahar. And this is happening in the monsoons. So the rains will come and the cardboards will get wet and then they will collapse, and that is where people were trying to seek shelter. Where I was born in Kashmiri Gate, from my house, I could see the city wall. And my mother used to tell me, and the city wall had these arches, which were arches, the wall that ran around all around the city. These arches were about 2 feet deep. Each arch became a house. There were women, young girls, little kids, infants. They would all huddle in that little space, 2 feet deep, 3, 4 feet wide, 5 feet, 6 feet high. When women had to take a bath or wash themselves, they'll hang a curtain or a sheet outside and change there. This is where they cooked. This is where they lived. And the men would sleep on top of the wall. And my mother used to tell me that there were hundreds of them like this, all over. So the city went through a total transformation. And the kind of things that happened during this period. And there is this book, I don't know whether Ishtiaq Saab has been able to see it, but it's an incredible record of that time, written by Anis Kidwai, and called Tani Ki Chhaon Mein. Was translated by Anis Kidwai's granddaughter and was published by Penguin some time ago, In the Shade of Freedom. And she has described life in the Purana Qila. Her husband was killed by rioters in Mussoorie, I think. She came to Delhi and she was totally distraught. And then Gandhiji said, you know, she went to meet Gandhiji. He came from that famous Kidwai family, Rafi Ahmad Kidwai's family. And she went to Gandhiji and said, I don't know how to do. I seem to have no purpose in life. So then Gandhiji sent her to work among these people. And she said, your loss is great. But you look at these people, they have nothing left. You still have a family. Your sisters are there. Your brothers are there. You have a family of in-laws who love you. And she wrote virtually a diary, which was later published. And she has described the people she met and the kind of violence they had suffered. And later she was to work among the refugees who had come from Pakistan, and she worked for years in settling them. And if you read that record, you understand the kind of killings that took place and the planned manner in which killings were happening, that this was not something that was spontaneous. We are told again and again that, you know, there was this spontaneous anger that came out. But the more you get to read of it, you realize that these things were not spontaneous. There were forces that had been working on it, that had been working for this kind of a conflagration for perhaps for decades. Because what happened in 1947, the kind of killings that happened, the way people were killed, we have seen repetitions of that several times in independent India. We have seen them in 1984 and we have seen them in the Gujarat carnage. So there was this that Delhi went through. And I think there is, I don't know whether Ishtiaq Saab would agree with me, but I think that the way the entire thing has been presented, I don't know what is the situation in Pakistan, but the way it has been presented in India, it appears that it was only a problem of the Punjab refugees. And in fact, the discourse of what is happening to Delhi, and if you place it in the context of what was happening all over the country, you find very little mention of, Ishtiaq Saab had talked about it, about Bengal. But in the discourse in Delhi, there is very little mention of the Bengalis. To the extent that the Bengali refugees who had found their way to Delhi, the first time they were given plots of land to build houses was 20 years after partition. Actually 22 years, in 69. So this is that part of partition that we don't talk about. And the another part of partition that we don't talk about is the caste structure of the refugees that came. There is no mention of the Dalits. What happened to them? Where did they go? There is very little mention of the non-Punjabi migrants, of the Sindhis, of the Multanis, of the people who came from Peshawar, the Hindu Pathans and Sikh Pathans. There is very little discussion of that. The entire thing seems to have become a discourse of the well-to-do who came from Punjab, and not the bulk of the migrants. The other thing that I think that partition did, which the impact was far greater on Lahore, because till before partition, the cultural capital of North India was Lahore and not Delhi. So the finest musical concerts, the best writers, the best artists, all that, they were, there was the Lahore College of Art, there was Lahore Radio, there was, and the gathering of the progressive writers and all that, large number of them were centered around Lahore. All India Radio Delhi was not such a big thing at that time. So the displacement of all that, which is what Lahore suffered when this migration happened, and that helped Delhi to grow. So quite a lot of the cultural icons who were then Lahore centered, Pakistan centered, what is now Pakistan, who was centered in Lahore, they shifted to Delhi. Some of the major benefactors of Lahore that Professor Ishtiaq has mentioned, their footprints are very visible in Delhi. Dayal Singh College was opened in Delhi and is one of the leading colleges of Delhi University. And Ishan, incidentally, is a student of Dayal Singh College. And the Dayal Singh College library is in Delhi. it got. I don't know whether they were able to bring because the library is there, so they must have restarted the library. Tribune began to be published from Delhi, and now I don't think it's published from Delhi any longer, but the Tribune Bureau is here. And there is, of course, the Sir Ganga Ram Hospital. So, so when this population shifts, there were these people who also shifted, and with them, their institutes that they had shifted. Delhi actually, and what is now referred to as the walled city, thanks to the Delhi Development Authority, was Shahjahanabad, Jahanabad, or New Delhi. That place seemed to lose out heavily. The city lost its character. Because it lost its language, it lost its way of life, and New Delhi took over. And since I had mentioned a little while ago that the leftover population of Delhi was 600,000 and the number of migrants were 800,000. So then the way Delhi suddenly grew, and from a city it turned into a metropolis and then a megalopolis, that now you have these large areas, which all of them were set up immediately after partition. Lajpat Nagar, Malviya Nagar, Rajendra Nagar, Tilak Nagar, Ramesh Nagar, Moti Nagar, all these areas were almost 100% localities that were settled by those who had come from what is now Pakistan. So the character of the city totally changed. It is going through another transformation now, but that is a different, that is something that began happening in the 70s. But I think this is what broadly Delhi went through as a result of partition.
Thank you, Ishtiaq Saab and Ashish Saab. It was brilliant to understand the pain, the misery, and the whole lot of things happening around both the cities, twin sisters or whatever one can call it, Delhi or Lahore. And of course, there's a good old saying in Lahore, "Ni dekhya, no jamia." So I really want to go to Lahore exactly for that purpose. To just see, I'm like, no, I am born. I want to go and visit Lahore. So there are a couple of, and I also I enjoyed, and there are a bunch of questions I am coming up with. One, of course, is Hashmi Saab mentioned, and this is Ishtiaq Saab. Hashmi Saab mentioned about when the migrants or people, I would call them people who started coming from Lahore specifically to Delhi, and also because both are in a way bordering, right? You're Lahore or Amritsar now, or if you call it just by the border, the Wagah and Atari border. One is when people from Delhi now, or Punjab, what we call, going to Lahore, how are they being accepted by the society now? Because it's a new place, so to speak. And second as well, where were they sort of settling in? Like Hashmi Saab mentioned about, like, bunch of the places which were turned into refugee camps. Was this similar in Lahore as well? Or were people able to easily smooth in? I don't think so, but still, just want to understand.
Ishtiaq Saab is, I think, muted.
Yes, you have to unmute yourself. Let me send. Yeah. He's
I'm unmuted.
Yes.
So the question is, did new localities or land be granted to the refugees who came? I would say not really, because as I told you, if you went to Lahore before 1947, most of the uh, uh, localities in the developed parts of Lahore were Hindu Sikh property. So people who came from Amritsar, very close, Jalandhar, Ludhiana, and other parts of Punjab were able to occupy or were given, places uh, uh, to live in one of these localities. But I think they were absorbed. Punjabis with an agrarian or a rural background were sent to the Punjabi villages, Lahore and Lahore villages and other parts of Punjab. So only those who were of an urban sort of background, they were accommodated within what the Hindus and Sikhs had left in Lahore. So that's a bit different from the way Suhail Hashmi Saab has explained the situation in Delhi. Later on, Lahore developed beyond what the British had developed and the walled city, and now you have the defense and other places, which for me are actually foreign territory. When I go there, I don't feel I'm in Lahore at all. But most of the successful and rich people, they have crossed the canal and live in these upper class, very rich localities. What I wanted to comment on, because before I forget, is an identical way how the riots were undertaken. Neighbors almost never attacked neighbors. If they wanted to go and attack, they went to another locality. And so doing it to people that you have grown up with is very difficult, irrespective of the religion and all the negative propaganda which was going on. The second thing is a personal experience. In 2015, when I was coming to Delhi, a Punjabi writer, Parvez Rahi, who writes on films, he had just published a book on this great singer, I think Munawar Begum or Munawar Khanam or whatever. And he said, take these 10 copies and go to this particular bazaar in Delhi and just give the shopkeepers 1 copy each. And if they want, they can then order the books and I will supply them. So I go to Delhi, and then it's unbelievable, the rush when you come to the Chandni Chowk and you are going towards this street where all the bookshops are. After an hour and a half, I did manage to get there. And then I went to all these shopkeepers and they were very polite, very decent. And they said, Sahab, kitab to hum aapki le lenge, but nobody reads Urdu here. So, I mean, they could have taken the book and then thrown it away. But I think they had great respect for a book and didn't want to do that. So said, you keep the book and try somewhere else. So for me, I mean, who was behind the partition? Actually, the true story is it's the upper class Muslim Ashrafiya of the UP. There is a saying by this poet, John Elia, कि पाकिस्तान जो है ये अलीगढ़ के लौंडों की शरारत है. Now this might sound a bit funny, but this is true. Until 1937, Punjabis had no interest in the partition. They believed in this intercommunal harmony which the Punjab Unionist Party had established by Mia Fazle Hussain, succeeded by Sir Skandar Hayat, succeeded by Sir Khizr Hayat Tiwana. People were peaceful. Lahore had the highest percentage of bars. You could go, and dance clubs. There was a sizable Anglo-Indian Christian Goanese community living around the the railway line and so on. So Lahore was a very colorful city with a lot of music, as we were told, of course, and theaters and cinemas and actors. B.R. Chopra, the great film maker, he started a film called Lakshmi Chowk, which is where all the film people used to go. But he had to flee from Lahore and ended up making Chandni Chowk. So he just changed the name to Chandni Chowk, but originally the film was in the background of Lakshmi Chowk in Lahore. So you can see how things changed. What is so tragic, and I'm sure this is the same with Delhi, is that almost no trace of any Hindus and Sikhs were left in Lahore, despite that they were 40%. And if you looked at just the city population, then 50-50 Muslims and 50% Hindus and Sikhs. If you include the villages, then the Muslim population would increase. We still have a few hundred, maybe 1,000 or so, maybe a little more Hindus in Lahore. I know one character, Mehra, that I go and meet, but it's like going to a place looking for novelty, to find a Hindu in Lahore. But they're all gone. The Sikhs you see coming every now and then because they have the right to visit the shrines. And because of the turbans, they have come from India. But Hindus were almost absent. I knew about India because of the Bombay film industry and the films which were shown in Lahore. I was a film, fanatic, spent all my pocket money going to cinema and so. That's how I knew about Hinduism and Hindus, and in a way about the Sikhs also. Never met them in Lahore as such. And for what I know now, about 33% of Muslims were in Delhi, now reduced to 4%. But still, I think it's impressive. 4% surviving is some compliment to the Congress government which came into power. Let me tell you a story about Delhi, which is now being included in the new edition, Urdu edition of this book of mine, Jinnah, His Successes, Failures and Role in History. Is going to be published by September, I think. I keep writing weekly articles and I have a Facebook thing where I'm very active, and then I do videos on the partition and freedom struggle and so on. A gentleman, Zafar Ahmad, we were discussing how when Muslims were attacked in Delhi, they had no other place to go but to the place around Humayun's tomb, I am told. Hashmi Saab can help me. I think it's the same place that he's describing. And they were all in the thousands, scared and didn't know what will happen to them. What had happened was that the Hindus and Sikhs who came from West Punjab or West Pakistan, they wanted places to find, to live in. So they started threatening the Muslims of Delhi, and who had to run away, and those houses were occupied by the Hindus and Sikhs who had nowhere to go. So Zafar Ahmad says that he was only 2.5 years old in the lap of his mother when Mahatma Gandhi came there. Along with him were Dr. Zakir Hussain, who later on became President of India, and Dr. Ishtiaq Hussain Qureshi, who later on became a federal minister in Pakistan and the vice chancellor of Karachi University. Now, they came, they came to, Gandhiji was there, and they went to Gandhiji and said, only you can save the Muslims. And Gandhiji said, do you think really I can? They said, yes, sir, only you can do. And Zafar Ahmad says that my mother told me that the police, the administration, the army, nobody could protect them the way one man could, and that was Mahatma Gandhi. So thousands of Muslims of Delhi have a personal debt to Mahatma Gandhi. Those who wanted to stay in India, after Gandhiji's last fast unto death, Nehru and Patel ensured them that they will be able to stay on. And I'm sure Sohail Hashmi's family must be one of those who decided to stay in Delhi. But those who wanted to come to Pakistan, they also could freely do it in peace. So that's how I was, as I heard him, so many things came to my mind, the similarities and the differences.
Ishtiaq Saab, there are a couple of persons, you have raised some personal experiences. There are a couple that I want to share.
Yeah.
And this was something that I was, in any case, wanted to speak about, the question of settling the refugees. Now, as I had mentioned earlier, the population of Muslims in the walled city had dropped substantially. And there were large areas which were from where the Muslims had either been killed or they had managed to escape and go to Purana Qila and Humayun's tomb, and then eventually to Pakistan. So there were pockets where there were maybe a few hundred Muslims, now maybe 20 were living. And empty houses were lying empty. So some of the new arrivals began to be settled there by the administration. Now, the Muslims living in that area were very, very scared because they had chosen not to go. And in my family, only my father had chosen not to go. Rest of my family went to Pakistan. You might have heard of my Taya, Anis Hashmi.
Actually, I've met him. So
yeah. So my father was the younger brother of Anis Hashmi, and my father's younger brother was Hamid Hashmi, who used to work with Imroz, who died in an aeroplane accident.
Yes.
Yes.
Him too I've met in Lahore Mahfils.
Yes. So now when these migrants began to be settled in these localities in Shah Jahanabad, where Muslims used to live there, the Muslims who had decided not to leave and were hiding in their houses, they were in a panic. And a delegation went and met Gandhi. And they said, these people are coming after, their large number of their family members have been killed. They have, they have lost everything, and they are angry. And we are here helpless. If these people come in here, this might become a place of where clashes will begin in the city. And we are feeling very scared. So Gandhiji set up a committee, which included Sushila Nayyar, included Maulana Ahmad Saeed, who was my grandfather's elder brother, and Tribhuvan Nath, I think his name was, Zar Zuchi, and 2-3 other people. And these people were asked to go and report to Pandit Nehru on a daily basis. And Gandhiji asked Pandit Nehru to instruct Sardar Patel, if he wants to settle people in these localities, he must first consult the local people who are living there. If they have no fear, then the refugees can be settled there. But if the local people are afraid and they don't want outsiders coming and living there, you have to find other places for them. And that is how large number of these localities came up. And there were not too many people from outside who came and settled in the city. So the houses that were lying vacant lay vacant for a long time. And all of them were not unlike what had happened in Lahore, for instance, because large localities were emptied, as you have said. And those who came were people from Punjab, which is also an important thing, because people who went from Amritsar, Ludhiana and Jalandhar were Punjabi speaking people.
Exactly.
And so there was no, except for there were differences of language, where, the Lahore people thought their Punjabi is far superior, as opposed to the Punjabi of Jalandhar, So, but they were both Muslims. They were both Muslims and both spoke roughly the same language. As opposed to the migrants who were coming into Shahjahanabad, they were coming into localities, Muslim localities, and where some Muslims continued to live. The people who were coming in were not Muslims and they spoke a different language. So they were, the difference in Delhi was twofold, which you did not have in Lahore. So adjustment and accommodation would have been far more difficult and iffy in those days in Delhi than it was in Lahore, for instance.
Right.
I had an interesting follow-up question, Hashmi. I will ask, but we'll discuss this later. Which was about, for example, in Delhi when people migrated, they took over houses like Ghalib's Haveli or Zafar Mahal was taken over, and other bigger places like this, right? Which we consider, when I'm saying we, I'm putting us as history enthusiast or the architecture or culture enthusiast, right? So we'll discuss this later as well. But what I wanted to understand as well, that amidst all this happening, right, and as I mentioned earlier before our talk, was that now partition happened. Announcement was made already that this is going to happen, independence will be there, partition will be there, and XYZ. What was and I think somewhere down the line, they also understood that when this will happen, probably riots will also happen. I don't know. I'm just asking this. So if they knew, right, what were the big names, big leaders that time were doing? Like, for example, Jinnah for now Pakistan and Nehru for now India. How are they also trying to keep both the countries sort of calm and maintain peace, maintain the essence of the sort of Indianness, so to speak, or Pakistanness? So that's a question for both of you, actually.
Let me begin. I mean, I need to add just one thing to the discussion we had earlier, and that is when the Muslims came, and they came in the hundreds and thousands. They had to stay in the Walton refugee camp and some other places. But they were all then absorbed in the localities the Hindus and Sikhs had vacated. Okay. So initially it was the Walton refugee camp. And now about your question, what Jinnah did, and we'll of course hear about Nehru, and so a little we know already about the Indian way. You see, in my Jinnah book, I've made a very provocative statement. I've said that after the 16th August 1946 rioting and people beginning to be killed in large numbers, Jinnah Sahib never ever visited any such place. On the other hand, you find Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru paying visits, Gandhiji to Noakhali, Tripura, and Calcutta, and Jawaharlal Nehru to Bihar, So the Congress leaders, I think Patel also was there in Mumbai, looking into this. But Jinnah never ever visited any refugee camp. He would at times send Nawabzada Liaquat Ali Khan and others to go and find out what's happened and would issue a statement. He was in Lahore for 3 weeks in October, had come down for Karachi to plan the operation in Kashmir. And Walton refugee camp where people in the lakhs were languishing, he wouldn't go there. Then finally, the rehabilitation minister of Punjab, Mia Iftikharuddin, who from I think 1935 to 1945 was the Punjab Congress president, who had shifted support to the Muslim League after the Communist Party of India had started supporting this idea of oppressed nationalities having the right to their own states, which was actually a cover for justifying support to the two-nation theory. I think the Communist Party thought that in India, Gandhiism would not make possible a socialist revolution, whereas in Pakistan, Islamic socialism could be more radical, a more absurd sort of assessment can't be imagined. But Mia Iftikharuddin was rehabilitation minister. He finally persuaded Jinnah to visit the Walton refugee camp. And when Jinnah came there, he was escorted by the father of a very, very dear friend of mine from my locality, whose name I can't reveal. He said that when he came to the Walton refugee camp, people started beating their chest and cursing him for all that had happened to their families, their women, their children, because so many had been killed. And that is when Jinnah was shocked for the first time, realizing the consequences. Kuldeep Nayyar is reported to have said that on that occasion, Jinnah said, "Oh my God, what I've done." But I've checked it with the people who are reported to be with him on that occasion. And there nobody sort of confirms that. But anyhow, it's possible Jinnah may finally have said that. But this is not reported in the Pakistani press. In my partition book, all I mention is a report from the Pakistan Times of 7th November 1947, giving a wrong impression that when Jinnah came there, the spirit of the people was lifted. It's the other way around. They mourned, they lamented, they deplored all that had happened to them. Now I think we'll ask Sohail Hashmi Saab to tell us more in detail about how the Indian government dealt. But before I hand over or let him speak, after Pakistan came into being, Jinnah always issued statements saying that we as Muslims should take very great responsibility in protecting the religious minorities. But his statements were all lost because had, according to the 3 June partition plan, Hindus and Sikhs stayed on in large numbers in the whole of West Pakistan, they would be 21% of the Pakistan population. Already by December 1947, Hindu-Sikh population had reduced to 1.6%. And to this day, it is 1.6%, almost none in Punjab and elsewhere, only in Sindh interior and in Karachi. Very few. One thing more before I hand the Dalit question. What happened to the Dalits? Well, this is interesting. The Dalits were needed to do all they had been historically forced to do, whether India or Pakistan. And there is an administrative order issued by Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan that the Dalits should be retained in Pakistan because who else would do the job they are needed to do? So nobody looked at the Dalits, how they would be affected. But later on, I met some Dalits who are also divided between the Indian Punjab and Pakistani Punjab, and they have converted to Christianity. And once in a while, through the Christian connection, they are able to meet. So I think that's what I had to say. Yeah.
जी, तो एक तो about how did Gandhi and Nehru specifically reacted to this situation. You have already mentioned Noakhali. And after Noakhali and after ensuring that killings stop in Bengal, Gandhiji had set out with a plan to visit Delhi and then go to Lahore. And his plan was to fast there to stop the killings in Lahore. But he could not leave Delhi because Delhi was in ferment and there were constant killings and so on and so forth. So he was firefighting in Delhi throughout this period. Now, he went to 10 days before he was assassinated, he went to the Humayun's tomb refugee camp. And he met those people who were going to Pakistan and to find out what their condition was and when they were being looked after, etc. All the facilities, whatever could be arranged was there or not. He organized meetings in Shah Jahanabad, and the last meeting that he organized, the last public meeting that Gandhiji had organized, was just before this committee was set up to meet Pandit Nehru on a daily basis. This meeting was held at the residence of Barrister Asif Ali. And I know about this because my grandfather's elder brother, Maulana Ahmad Saeed, presided over that meeting and spoke before Gandhiji. And in this meeting, Gandhiji issued an appeal and he set up two committees, one of Muslims and one of Hindus, who will go around the city and convince the hotheads to stop collecting weapons and to surrender their weapons to this committee. So Maulana Ahmad Saeed was in one of these committees and Tribhuvan Nath Zar was in the other committee, who was also a very well-known poet of Urdu. And it was on Gandhiji's insistence, actually, I don't know whether this is talked about, his last fast was one for giving to Pakistan the money that India owed them as part of the partition agreement, because when the assets were being divided, everything could not be divided. So what could not be divided, the monetary value was taken, and that came to some 50 crores or 70 crores, whatever, which had to be given to Pakistan. And there was resistance in India, especially through Sardar Patel, because he was convinced that this money will be used for operations in Kashmir. So he was against giving that money. And Gandhiji tried to convince them. And he said, look, you have signed an agreement. And according to that agreement of partition, you have to give that money. And Sardar Patel was saying, no, they will use it against us. He said that you cannot decide. It is their money. They will do what they want to do with their money. You can't tell them, we'll give you the money, but you can't use it like this. And Gandhiji said, now you have to stop behaving like politicians and grow up and become operating, functioning like statesmen. There was no agreement, and Gandhiji went on a hunger strike. One of the reasons why he was killed was because he was saying, you have to give to Pakistan what you have signed for. Just let me finish this.
Yeah.
And the other issue, once this money was given, Gandhiji continued his fast. And he said, my fast, I'll break this fast once conditions are created for observing the Urs of Qutbuddin Bakhtiyar Kaki as per tradition, and the call of boycott of Muslims given by Hindu Mahasabha is publicly withdrawn. Because Hindu Mahasabha had said, stop buying stuff from Muslims, stop selling to them. And Muslims, if they were identified, they were being offloaded from buses or thrown from running trains. Gandhiji, this was the demand. Gandhiji said, this has to stop. And eventually, when leaders of Hindu Mahasabha came in a delegation to Gandhiji and vowed in front of him that they have withdrawn this call, and when he was assured that all repairs have been carried out for at the shrine of Bakhtiyar Kaki and the Urs can take place, that is when he broke his fast. All these things became the major reasons for Nathuram Godse to kill him, because they were able to then paint him as somebody who was supporting the Muslims. Sorry, you were saying something, I stopped you.
Yes, all my life, and even in my Jinnah book, I subscribe to what you have said, that he was assassinated by Godse because on the one hand, he insisted that those Muslims who wanted to remain in India should be given equal rights and left in peace. And those who want to go to Pakistan, they could do it peacefully as well. And I also said, as you now mentioned, that he, in this fast unto death, insisted that Pakistan's 50 crore rupees be paid to Pakistan. But Gandhiji's grandson, who is himself a professor, Rajmohan Gandhi, he wrote to me saying that whereas the first part is correct, that he went on to fast unto death, insisting that Muslims in India should be given equal rights and left in peace. This is a Hindu Mahasabha concoction, that part of this fast unto death was also giving Pakistan rupees 55 crore. And then many other scholars have also said that the two have to be kept apart. Although I tend to agree with the way you understand and as I have understood, because technically maybe when he declared his fast unto death, it was about giving Muslims protection and equal rights. But almost in those very days was the second statement that Pakistan be given rupees 55 crore as was due to Pakistan. Gopal Gandhi, the brother of Godse, this fellow, and Gopal Godse, the brother of Nathuram Godse, if you look at his video, he alleges that Gandhi was a Muslim-loving Hindu or agent who, because of him, rupees 55 crore were given to Pakistan, which they used then to fight the war in Kashmir. So I'm not challenging you, brother. I'm just saying that until very recently, and in my latest book, I also subscribe to this theory. But now people are pointing out that the fast unto death was only for Muslims to be left in peace and given equal rights and not molested, harassed, intimidated, and so on. But not for insisting on this 55 crore being given to Pakistan.
You see,
Why this is so, I don't know, but
you see,
so,
my source of information on this is that on Gandhiji's 125th anniversary, birth anniversary, the newspaper The Hindu had carried out a column that ran for 200 days. Gandhi, the last 200 days. And notings of his secretary, Gandhiji's secretary, on daily basis, who did he meet, what did he say in his prayer meetings, all that was recorded and they just reproduced it. And now an expanded version of that has been published. No, not 200 days, Gandhi, the last 100 days. And that has been published as a book by The Hindu. So I remember reading it in that column, because I had collected that column, and there this was clearly the entire discussion with the cabinet, with Pandit Nehru, with Sardar Patel, and Gandhiji saying that we have to now grow into becoming statesmen and behave like statesmen. We have signed that agreement. We should pay this money.
So I wonder why this new position has emerged, and from his own family. Rajmohan Gandhi, he wrote to me, and then other people have said that so is the case. I think it's good for us to know that, because I think on your own you can check why this distinction has been made, that while both statements were at the same time, but technically only the fast unto death was about Muslims being left alone in peace. Why this has emerged baffles me as well. So that's, I think, because we are also scholars, we all constantly are trying to establish what is the truth.
As far as possible, try to get to the truth.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Ahmed and Sohail Saab, for such a wonderful conversation. And I'll come in, and I owe to two Lahoris at least. One is the Lahori Tangewala that my grandfather made me listen to. It was a song, Ghoda Peshwari Mera Tanga Lahori Mera, Baitho Miyaji Baitho Lala, Main Hu Albela Tangewala. I think that's a Rajkumar film, early 50s, and it shows the impact of partition that had on cinema, and also to Dayal Singh Majithia, because of whom I could do my BA in Delhi University because of the less marks that I got in class 12. But thank you so much for pointing out so many important issues, especially the lack of discourse or the lack of narrative about caste question in this whole partition saga, and also the religion point of view. Maybe the Christians are now the Parsis. What happened to the Parsis? We do not know. We only know about the Punjabis, and to a certain extent now about Bengalis. So my question to you is, because Ishtiaq Saab, you mentioned in your opening statement about the Urdu speaking people, and in India, especially in India, I do not know about Pakistan, the narrative is that Urdu is not a Hindu language. It's the language of the other in society, and there's this bifurcation that is happening today, which I think is an impact of partition. So Sohail Saab, Ishtiaq Saab, what do you think about the impact of partition on Zaban, especially Urdu, Hindi?
Let me tell you that once again, while there was when the British took over from the Mughals, Persian was the state language, okay? And for a while they used Persian, but then they had to they decided to use Urdu. So, and when they came to Punjab, instead of opening schools in Punjabi, they sort of discussed this and found that Urdu and urban Punjabi were very similar. So education in Punjab introduced by the British was only in Urdu. Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs who went to school, got government employment, established businesses, became writers, were all proficient in Urdu. The three great writers, of partition, Rajinder Singh Bedi, the greatest of all, Saadat Hasan Manto, Krishan Chandar, Balwant Singh, and I can name so many others. They only wrote in Urdu. Even Munshi Premchand, who was from UP, wrote his work in Urdu.
Yes.
So as far as from what I've read, and I've read quite a lot, a Hindi revivalist movement started in the 1880s in the UP. And that is when Sir Syed and the Ashrafia felt that Urdu is under threat, and that Urdu is the language of the Muslims and Hindi is the language of the Hindus. That's the origin of it. But if you look at the grammar, the syntax, they are all part of this. It's the same language, related to Sanskrit and the subsequent development of language, Pratrik, and so on and so forth. So I think as languages, they originate from the same source and were, until I think about the beginning of the 18th century, one language as well, which is known as Hindustani. When I speak or you speak in the street, it's Hindustani. It's never should Hindi, nor should Urdu. This is done by poets and writers, professors. But people speak Hindustani.
Yeah.
But when the partition demand started, then in 1936, there is a Congress resolution that in future, already in the Nehru Report 1928, and then repeated in 1936, that in free India, secular, with equal rights for men and women, no state religion, Hindustani will be the national language, and it will have two official scripts, Devanagari and Persian Urdu. But Jinnah Sahab, in his communication with the Congress leaders, insisted that Hindustani is no language at all. It's a Congress fabrication. Hindi is the language of Hindus and Muslim is the exclusive language of Muslims. So in Pakistan, Urdu is the national language and it's the language of education as well now all over Pakistan. The Sindhis try to maintain their language. The Pakhtuns half-heartedly do it. But actually the whole of Punjab, when they are educated, it's in Urdu. I remember I taught for a few years at Government College Lahore recently, and I took up this language question and I asked the girls who were attending my class, MPhil in human rights, what would be your mother tongue? And they said Urdu. But then I said, aren't you very Tet, native Punjabis, Lahoris? They said, yes, but our mother have talked to us only in Urdu. So mother tongue technically is the language your mother speaks to you. Yeah. So the educated elite of Lahore only speak Urdu, Even my own nephews and nieces, if you speak to them in Punjabi, they would find it very odd. Once you are middle class and you know Urdu, it means you have crossed the border from being a village bum and have become urban and educated. And if you are a little better educated, then you speak only English. So it's a class question as well. So that's how Urdu has been dealt with. Hindi, of course, I don't know if anybody reads it. I'm sure some people in the intelligence services must have learned it, but not really. we have very few Hindus, and there are 2 Hindu mandirs in Lahore.
Yeah.
One of them very active. For the few thousand Hindus who are still there, but I don't think Hindi is read or spoken or whatever. I mean, people speak Urdu, which is Hindustani.
Yes.
It's still Hindustani. Ordinary language is Hindustani even in Pakistan, and not Urdu. The written thing is Urdu, Persian, Arabic. Yeah.
Sohail Saab?
You see, this whole issue of Hindi, the language of Hindus, and Urdu, the language of Muslims, the entire thing is false. Nowhere in the world is language confined to religion. The language of people who live in Punjab, whether they were Hindus or Muslims or Sikhs, their language was Punjabi. And in Bengal, the language of Muslims, and there's a large Muslim population in Bengal, is not Urdu. The Muslims of Tamil Nadu do not have nothing to do with Urdu. And similarly, those who went to Pakistan, of all the people who went to Pakistan, the Urdu was the language only of those who went from UP and a few who came from Hyderabad. It was not the language of those people who lived in Punjab or in what is the Pakhtunkhwa area now, or the Multanis, or the Sindhis, or the Gujaratis, or, and Karachi is part of Sindh. So in none of this, or the Baloch, Urdu was nobody's language. Urdu was only the language of the Muhajir. And they made it the language of Pakistan. And it has made every language in Pakistan suffer phenomenally.
Right.
Phenomenally.
Absolutely.
The entire cultural, this thing has collapsed, and the reverse of that is happening. I was doing a course with Ashoka University on the linguistic diversity of Delhi. And the students, I had sent them to go and survey 2 language groups, and one of them was Sindhis. And then I went and met this gentleman who told me that his father used to read the Jhulelal's teachings in Sindhi written in the Arabic script, which was the original script of Sindhi. After independence in India, we made Nagari the script for Sindhi. So he said, my father read Jhulelal in Arabic. I read it in the Nagari script. My son does not understand or speak Sindhi and cannot read Jhulelal because the entire literary tradition was killed by the changing of the script. And this whole thing of Urdu for Muslims and Hindi for Hindus was created in Fort Williams College at the behest of John Borthwick Gilchrist. And as Professor Ishtiaq rightly pointed out, in 1880s, this movement for removing Urdu and replacing it with Hindi was started. And then people like Sir Sayyid, who came up with this idea that Urdu, and then Jinnah continues with it, that Urdu is the language of Muslims. Krishan Chand, Balwant Gargi, Ram Lal, Kanhaiya Lal.
You name them. Yeah, you name them.
You know, the first history of Urdu literature is written by a Hindu.
Yeah.
One of the finest Masnavis of Urdu was written by a Hindu. The first epic novel in Urdu was written by a Hindu, Ratan Nath Sarshar.
Wow.
You know, so how can you say that? Nobody says that English is the language of Christians.
Yeah.
You know, we are conversing in English. None of us is a Christian.
But
How
all
to
this is
le-
because of the two nation theory as the
Yes,
foundation of the partition.
yes,
That's the problem.
yeah,
That's the
yeah.
problem. That's the problem.
And yes, and that is why this question was to understand and to make people aware of this. And I think it's a critical issue now because India is going to a different direction altogether, and now this divide between languages is widening, unfortunately, as we saw. But thank you so much to
No,
both
the
us.
absurd levels to which this went. In Delhi, in Shahjahanabad, there used to be what was known as the Urdu Bazaar.
Yes.
And the Urdu Bazaar was the place, and the Urdu Maidan where the army used to camp. Now, when the Hindi movement rose, and they came to Delhi and they said, oh, there is an Urdu Maidan. So we will have a Hindi Maidan. So in New Daryaganj, they created a Hindi Maidan without understanding what is the origin of Urdu Maidan. वो Urdu है तो हम हिंदी बनाएंगे, you know. So it has been fought at that absurd level.
Right.
Yeah.
Agreed. Absolutely. We are agreed.
Yeah. And then my generation is illiterate in 3 languages, as Indira Gandhi mentioned. We are illiterate in Hindi, Urdu, and English. So my generation kind of mix and match everything and makes a khichdi out of it. And we are kind of surviving. But thank you so much to both our speakers, Sohail Saab and Ishtiaq Saab, for taking out time to talk about the impact that an event like partition had on Pakistan, on India, and 2 cities that are very identical. As Ishtiaq Saab said, when he came to Delhi, he found similar structure, similar culture in Delhi and also in Lahore. And I think we couldn't have a better start of a conversation that is going to commemorate different aspects of partition, be it food, be it literature, be it textile, be it the women, and much more that we are going to discuss till 14th of August. That will be our last session for this series, Karwan Baithak Sarhad ke Ispar Uspar. And in this conversation, we talked about the change in language and demographies in both the sides, how refugees they migrated, or the people migrated to both sides of the newly made borders, and how they settled. And also, as Sohail Saab mentioned, that sometimes the narrative kind of focuses only on the rich elite Punjabis who came from either side and settled. But now there's a change. There's a need for change of narratives of how we see partition, because we are celebrating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav in India, the 75th anniversary of independence. But somehow we forget that the price that we paid for independence was the partition of our own land, of our own memories, of our own families. And that Ishtiaq Saab said that when Jin visited the Walton refugee camp, so the people kind of jumped on him and said, you divided us, you divided our country, you divided our family and memories. So with that thought, I think it was a wonderful session. Thanks to my co-host, Sadav Bhai, for bringing up so many interesting questions in the beginning. Thank you so much, Ishtiaq Saab. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you would like to say anything about Karwan, that's the best way to end the conversation.
No, I think Karwan, I have had the privilege of taking part in your programs earlier. I enjoyed it then, but this was a thing of its own kind. I think I found myself very much involved with my heart and mind as we discussed. And I think more of these discussions are needed because so much hatred is being bombarded to people through this social media, and because of political radicalization, brutalization, that we have a duty then to uphold the truth and to look for what is common between our people. Because that's the only way you can build peace. From Buddha to Guru Nanak to all of us, the idea is that humanity is united by dukh, by suffering, by pain. And the duty of human beings is to lessen the pain of others. That's what humanity is all about. We should do it in that spirit. And I wish Caravan great success in this latest venture. All the best.
Thank you so much, Ishtiyaq Saab. Sohail Saab, any last comments before we end?
As I've
I think he's facing some internet issues at his.
Caravan has been able to achieve in the last 2 years or so is phenomenal in terms of the range of issues you have been able to tackle, and more importantly, the kind of people that you have been able to bring together, some of the finest minds working in the field of history and in related fields. That and it was certainly great pleasure listening to Professor Ishtiyaq today, because he was able to. This is the area that he is in, that he has been able to bring in so many very interesting facets into this discussion. And I wish you the very best and hope for the success of this series as well, like all the other series. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir. And I would also like to thank our partners for the series, Quasi and iTokri, who are supporting this conversation series. I would also like to mention that our second session is going to be on 3rd of July, 5 p.m. India Standard Time, on archiving partition stories, oral histories. We have 3 young, bright oral historians from India, Pakistan, and Great Britain. We have Kavita Puri, who is executive producer at BBC. We have Anam Zakaria, who has worked on both Pakistan and Bangladesh partition memories, and Achal Malhotra, who has worked on especially Delhi and Indian side of the partition story. So we would like to have all of you there. Sadabhai, would you like to say something before we end?
No, that's it. People should just come and attend all the conversations. But I enjoyed this particular conversation. I don't think we could have had like a better start to understand both the cities and what it went through and what it had going. Frankly, I love Zaban language, and I feel it's like I always tell people, Zaban, Tehzeeb और खाना ये तीनों change होते रहती हैं. Or impact hota hai. And that's what I think I wasn't expecting. I remember speaking with Ishan a long while back and I said, hey, should we have a discussion on Zaban as well, that how it changed? And I'm glad that you all talked about Zaban as well. I am similar to Ishan, illiterate in multiple languages, not just 3. Would love to learn almost whatever I can. But thank you to both of you. I don't think I would have asked for a better Saturday.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody. Do follow Caravan and Sadab Bhai's account on social media. The links are in the description. Ishtiyaq Sahab has a YouTube channel that you all must watch. He uploads regularly on that YouTube channel. The link is also in the description to that YouTube channel. Go and subscribe to that channel. And we look forward to seeing all of you there. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great evening ahead.